The water supply for 40 million Americans is collapsing, and the two largest reservoirs in the United States, their primary buffer against catastrophe, are now at their lowest levels since they were first filled. The images are haunting. A 22-year megadrought, the worst in over a millennium, has pushed the entire American Southwest to the edge of a reckoning. In Arizona, entire communities built on the promise of endless growth are now watching their wells run dry. Along the shores of Lake Mead, intake pipes built to supply Las Vegas with water are now exposed, sitting uselessly high above the shrinking waterline. Decades of overconsumption have collided with a climate that is fundamentally changing. The government has been forced to declare the first-ever official water shortage on the river, triggering unprecedented cuts to farmers and entire states. 7 states, 2 nations, and 30 sovereign tribal nations are now locked in a desperate battle over a dwindling resource. The total economic activity dependent on the single river is valued at $1.4 trillion per year, 1/6 of the entire United States economy. Before we break down how we reached this point, let us know in the comments which state you're watching from. Seeing the global reach of this story helps us understand its true impact. A huge number of you watch these deep dives, but a stunningly high percentage forget to subscribe. If this kind of reporting is important to you and you want to see more of it, please take 1 second to click that button. It is the only way this channel can continue to exist and produce these investigations. It is urgent and it is important. Let's begin. This is not a story of a simple drought. This is a story of a fatal miscalculation made 100 years ago. This is how it happened. The story begins in 1922. A group of men, representatives from 7 western states, gathered at a palace in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Their goal was to divide the water of the most important river in the American West. They called it the Colorado River Compact. It was a landmark agreement designed to prevent endless legal battles and ensure orderly development. But it was built on a foundation of sand. The negotiators based their allocations on rainfall and river flow data from the previous 2 decades. The problem? Those 2 decades were the wettest period in the region in the last 500 years. They were dividing up a river that did not exist. They allocated 7.5 million acre-feet of water to the upper basin states of Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and New Mexico. They allocated another 7.5 million acre-feet to the lower basin states of Arizona, California, and Nevada, and later 1.5 million acre-feet were promised to Mexico. A total of 16.5 million acre-feet of water committed on paper. The river's actual average flow over the last century has been closer to 13.5 million acre-feet, and in the 21st century it's been closer to 12. Some years it's been under 10. From the moment it was signed, the compact created a structural deficit. The region has been promising more water than the river has ever consistently provided. For decades, this mathematical error was masked by the enormous storage capacity of its 2 colossal reservoirs, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. They acted like giant bank accounts, storing the surplus from wet years to be used in dry years. But starting in the year 2000, the withdrawals began to permanently outpace the deposits. The bank account has been relentlessly drawn down, and now the balance is approaching 0. And here is the detail that tells the real story. The entire system, the logic of who gets water and how much, is governed by a dizzying collection of rules, court decrees, and treaties collectively known as the law of the river. At its heart is the concept of seniority. The entities with the oldest claims, the senior rights holders, get their full allocation first. The newest claimants, the junior rights holders, are the first to be cut. California's Imperial Irrigation District, which provides water to grow a massive percentage of America's winter vegetables, holds some of the most senior rights on the entire river. Arizona, a state that has exploded in population, holds much more junior rights. This means that as the crisis deepens, farmers in central Arizona lose all their water allocations so that fields of alfalfa can be flood irrigated in the California desert. That is not an exaggeration. That is the brutal, century-old math of the law of the river. A system that made sense for the priorities of 1922 is now creating unthinkable consequences in 2024. The suburbs of Phoenix, with millions of people, have fewer legal rights to the water than a single farming district in another state. It's a staggering piece of history, a 100-year-old agreement dictating a modern catastrophe. What are your thoughts on this foundational mistake? Let us know in the comments below. To understand the scale of the failure, you have to look at the machinery of the river itself. The Colorado River begins as snowmelt high in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado and Wyoming. This snowpack is the true reservoir for the entire system. Its spring and summer melt provides over 90% of the river's total flow. The water then travels 1,450 miles southwest, carving through the desert, first filling Lake Powell, the nation's second-largest reservoir, held back by the Glen Canyon Dam. From there, it flows through the Grand Canyon to Lake Mead, the nation's largest reservoir, held back by the Hoover Dam. These 2 dams are the heart of the system. Their hydroelectric turbines power cities from Phoenix to Los Angeles. Their reservoirs provide the water that has allowed desert cities to exist. Both are now in critical condition. Lake Powell's surface has dropped over 170 feet from its full level. At its lowest point, it fell to just 32% of capacity. A stark, white bathtub ring stains the canyon walls, a mineral residue showing just how far the water has fallen. If the lake's level drops another few dozen feet, it will hit minimum power pool, the level at which the turbines at Glen Canyon Dam can no longer generate electricity. If it drops below that, it reaches dead pool, the point at which water can no longer flow downstream through the dam at all. That would be a system-wide failure, cutting off the water supply to Lake Mead and by extension to Arizona, Nevada, California, and Mexico. And here is what made the situation so much worse. The climate is not just getting drier, it's getting hotter. Scientists refer to this as aridification. It's a permanent shift to a warmer, drier baseline. Higher temperatures mean more of the snowpack evaporates before it can even melt into the river. Hotter air sucks moisture directly out of the river as it flows south, and it causes the reservoirs themselves to lose staggering amounts of water to evaporation. At Lake Mead, that evaporation alone accounts for a loss of nearly 6 feet of elevation every single year. 6 vertical feet of water vanished into the desert air. This is the new reality that the 1922 compact never anticipated. The river isn't just in a drought. Its very nature is changing. The supply of water is fundamentally shrinking, permanently. By 2002, just 2 years into the megadrought, scientists were already issuing dire warnings. The trend was clear. Water use was exceeding supply at an alarming rate. By 2015, Lake Mead had fallen to a new record low, prompting years of voluntary conservation efforts that proved insufficient. By 2021, the inevitable happened. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, the federal agency that manages the river, declared the first ever Tier 1 shortage. This triggered the first round of mandatory cuts, falling almost entirely on central Arizona farmers. By 2022, the situation had deteriorated so rapidly that the government declared a Tier 2 shortage, demanding even deeper cuts from Arizona, Nevada, and Mexico. By the summer of that year, Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner Camille Touton stood before the Senate and delivered an ultimatum. The 7 states had 60 days to come up with a plan to voluntarily cut their water use by an additional 2 to 4 million acre-feet. That is an enormous volume of water, up to nearly a third of the river's entire annual flow. She warned that if they failed, the federal government would act unilaterally to protect the system. The deadline came and went. The states failed to agree. The system was careening toward the collapse of both reservoirs. This is the human face of the crisis. This is a story that affects millions, but it's felt most acutely by individuals on the ground. If you believe this story needs to be seen by more people, please like this video and share it with your family. Awareness is the first, most critical step. Here is what was happening on the ground. Pinal County, Arizona, an agricultural hub located between Phoenix and Tucson. For generations, farmers here have grown cotton, alfalfa, and grain, supplied by a steady flow of Colorado River water delivered through a massive canal system called the Central Arizona Project. When the Tier 1 and Tier 2 cuts hit, these farmers were the first in line. Their water supply from the river was cut to zero, not reduced, eliminated. The fields that were once green turned to brown dust. Multi-generation family farms that had survived for a century were forced to sell off their equipment, lay off their workers, and let thousands of acres of land go fallow. One farmer, a man named Dan Thalander, whose family had been farming the area since the 1950s, was forced to fallow over half his land. He told reporters he had never seen anything like it. He was now relying entirely on a dwindling supply of groundwater, pumping from an aquifer that was not being replenished. He was, in his own words, mining a finite resource just to survive another year. He and his neighbors were living on borrowed time. It was a slow-motion economic disaster, unfolding acre by dusty acre. And it was not just farmers. In the Rio Verde foothills, an unincorporated community northeast of Scottsdale, Arizona, hundreds of homes relied on water hauled in by trucks from the city. They were not connected to a municipal system. In 2023, citing its own drought contingency plans, the city of Scottsdale cut them off. The trucks could no longer fill up. Overnight, families living in expensive homes found themselves with no legal way to get water. They showered at friends' houses. They used paper plates to avoid washing dishes. Some considered abandoning their homes entirely. A resident described the feeling as one of total helplessness, watching a modern American community lose access to the most basic necessity of life. Her well had run dry, and now the backup supply had been legislated away. This was not a developing country. This was a wealthy suburb of Phoenix. That is the scale of what is happening. A crisis of infrastructure and law, manifesting as a personal catastrophe for thousands. Here is what is not making most headlines. The single biggest user of Colorado River water is agriculture. It consumes roughly 80% of the river's entire flow. And a huge portion of that water, especially in places like California's Imperial Valley and parts of Arizona, goes to growing low-value, water-intensive crops like alfalfa and hay. Much of this hay is not even used to feed American livestock. It is compressed, packed into shipping containers, and exported to countries like Saudi Arabia and China to feed their dairy cows. The desert of the American Southwest is being used to grow animal feed for export to the other side of the world using a water supply that 40 million Americans depend on for survival. It is, in effect, the export of a non-renewable resource, water, in the form of hay. Legal loopholes and the rigid seniority of the law of the river allow this to happen. While cities are being asked to tear out their lawns and homeowners are watching their wells run dry, millions of acre-feet of water are being spread across desert fields to grow a crop that will be shipped overseas. That is the paradox at the heart of the crisis. Just a quick reminder as we dig deeper into these difficult truths, if you're finding this analysis valuable, please consider subscribing. I know, we're asking again, but our subscriber-to-viewer ratio is shockingly low, and your single click is the fuel for this entire channel. It tells us to keep going. It genuinely makes a huge difference. The political fallout from the federal ultimatum has been immense. The states are divided primarily along the lines of the original compact. The upper basin states argue that they are not using their full allocation, and that the lower basin, particularly California, has been overusing its share for decades. They point out that evaporation in the hot, dry lower basin reservoirs accounts for a massive loss of water that should be counted against the lower basin's share. The lower basin states fire back that their economies and populations were built on the promise of that water, and that California's senior rights are legally untouchable. The infighting became so intense that for a time, California was isolated, with the other 6 states proposing a plan that would place the burden of the cuts disproportionately on them. California refused, citing its ironclad legal rights. The federal government was left in the impossible position of having to mediate a dispute with no easy answer, a zero-sum game where any water given to one state must be taken from another. The threat of unilateral federal action looms over every negotiation, a step that would undoubtedly trigger a legal war that could last for decades, all while the reservoirs continue to drop. And the consequences extend far beyond just water taps. The Hoover Dam, once a symbol of American engineering might, is being weakened. It was designed to generate up to 2,074 megawatts of power. As Lake Mead's water level drops, the pressure on the turbines decreases and so does their power output. Capacity has already been reduced by more than 25%. A continued decline threatens the stability of the power grid for a significant portion of the Southwest. Electricity prices could rise as utilities are forced to purchase more expensive power from natural gas plants, contributing to the very climate change that is exacerbating the drought. It is a vicious feedback loop. Then there is the economic impact on recreation. The boating, fishing, and tourism industries centered on Lake Mead and Lake Powell generate hundreds of millions of dollars a year. As the water recedes, boat ramps are left stranded hundreds of yards from the water's edge. Marinas have had to be moved at immense cost. The once bustling lakes are becoming less attractive, threatening the livelihoods of thousands of people in small communities that depend entirely on tourism. This is a crisis with no simple villain and no easy solution. Yet, solutions are being desperately pursued. Cities like Las Vegas have become world leaders in water conservation. They have banned non-functional turf grass at commercial properties, implemented aggressive water recycling programs, and paid residents to tear out their lawns. Las Vegas has cut its total water consumption by over 25%, while adding more than 750,000 new residents. They have proven that growth is not inextricably linked to water use. But conservation alone, while critical, is not enough to close the structural deficit. Larger, more technologically ambitious projects are on the table. One major proposal is the construction of large-scale desalination plants on the coast of California or Mexico. These plants would turn seawater into fresh water, adding a new supply to the system. The primary obstacles are immense cost, enormous energy consumption, and the environmental challenge of disposing of the super salty brine that is a byproduct of the process. Another idea is large-scale water recycling, where wastewater is purified to drinking water standards and put directly back into the supply. While psychologically challenging for the public, the technology is safe and proven. Orange County in California already operates one of the world's largest such facilities. But scaling these projects up to a level that could make a difference for the entire Colorado River Basin would require an investment of tens, if not hundreds, of billions of dollars and decades of construction. These are not quick fixes. As we approach the final unsettling conclusions of this story, one last request from us. If you have watched this far, you clearly care about this issue and understand its gravity. Please join our community of subscribers who make this work possible. Don't be one of the more than 90% who watch and leave. Your subscription is your vote for more investigations like this one. It's how you tell us that this matters. And it is still not over. The temporary reprieve brought by a wetter-than-average winter in 2023, which raised reservoir levels slightly, did not solve the long-term problem. It merely bought a small amount of time. It was a single good year in a 23-year trend of severe dryness. The fundamental imbalance remains. The system is still over-allocated, consumption still outstrips the natural supply, and the climate continues to warm. In Mexico, the river that once flowed to the Sea of Cortez now peters out miles from the coast, its delta a dried, cracked mudflat. The rich ecosystem that once thrived there has been all but destroyed. On the sovereign lands of the 30 tribal nations within the basin, many hold senior water rights that have never been fully utilized or quantified.